Welcome back to Lore of the Multiverse, where we dive deep into the most intense, unbelievable, and mind-bending true stories from across time and space. Today, we're heading into the remote wilderness of northern Canada, where one man found himself face-to-face with a nightmare few of us could imagine, and lived to tell the tale. This is the true story of Fred Desjarlais, a trapper who battled a pack of wolves in the freezing wild, utterly alone, with nothing but grit and instinct. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy stories of survival against all odds. Fred Desjarlais was a seasoned man of the land. A Métis trapper who lived his life on the edges of civilization, Fred was no stranger to the brutal conditions of the Canadian winter. He had learned the ways of the forest from his father and grandfather, how to read tracks in the snow, how to set traps with bare hands in sub-zero temperatures, how to find shelter when a storm turned the woods against you. By the time he was in his 60s, Fred had spent more winters in the wild than he had in town. But nothing, not even a lifetime of experience, could prepare him for what would happen one quiet January morning in 2006. That morning started like many others. Fred left his remote trapping cabin near Fort Chipewyan, Alberta, bundled in layers of wool and animal skin. He set out on his snowmobile, heading deeper into the boreal forest to check his traplines. The air was still. The snow was fresh. A light fog hung low across the frozen landscape. It was the kind of silence that only exists in the north, a silence so complete, you can hear your own heartbeat. About 10 kilometers into the woods, Fred parked his snowmobile, grabbed his gear, and started walking the line. For hours, he trudged through knee-deep snow, checking snares and collecting what fur had been caught overnight. By midday, he was nearly done. That's when he noticed something strange. There were tracks in the snow that didn't belong. Large, round paw prints, not just one, but many, crisscrossing his path. They were fresh. He bent down, examined them closely, and felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. These were wolf tracks. And not just one lone wolf. A pack. Fred stood still, his breath fogging in the air. He scanned the tree line. Nothing. Just the soft whisper of the wind. He was used to seeing wolves. They were part of the ecosystem, and normally, they avoided humans. But this felt different. The tracks followed him. Flanked him. Circled him. He had the sudden, gut-wrenching realization, he was being stalked. Fred quickened his pace, cutting back toward his snowmobile. But the feeling didn't go away. In fact, it intensified. The hair on the back of his neck rose. He could feel eyes on him. Then, a flicker of movement between the trees. Another. And another. Gray shapes darting through the shadows. Wolves. By the time he reached his snowmobile, Fred's heart was pounding. He fired up the engine, but it sputtered. Once. Twice. Then died. It had frozen up. He cursed under his breath, turned, and that's when he saw them. 4 wolves, emerging from the tree line like ghosts. Big, lean, hungry. Their yellow eyes locked on him. Their breath steamed from snarling muzzles. Fred slowly reached for the rifle strapped to the side of his sled, but the wolves charged before he could lift it. The first wolf lunged at his arm. Its jaws clamped down with bone-crushing force. Fred swung wildly, slamming the stock of the rifle into the animal's skull. It yelped and staggered back, but the others were already on him. One snapped at his leg, dragging him into the snow. Another bit into his shoulder. Fred fought with the desperation of a man who knew this could be the end. He kicked, punched, roared in defiance. The snow turned red around him. He managed to chamber a round in the rifle and fired. The deafening crack echoed through the forest. One wolf dropped. The others backed off momentarily, circling again, snarling. Fred scrambled to his feet, bleeding heavily, rifle shaking in his hands. He fired a second shot, missed. Then the third, another hit. A second wolf crumpled. But there were still 2 left, and now they were cautious, clever. They feinted, darting in and out of the trees, waiting for him to weaken. Blood loss made Fred dizzy. His arm was shredded, his leg barely supporting him. He couldn't outrun them. couldn't outlast them. So he did the only thing he could, he stood his ground. The wolves came again. What followed was a brutal, minute-by-minute battle. Fred fought like an animal himself, driven by instinct and the sheer will to survive. He used his rifle as a club. Threw snow in their eyes. Even bit one wolf on the ear when it latched onto his arm. He was fighting for his life with every fiber of his being. Finally, the last wolf hesitated. It stood just beyond reach, growling low, teeth bared. Fred shouted at it, blood running from his mouth, eyes wild. The wolf turned and vanished into the trees. Silence. Nothing but Fred's ragged breathing and the stench of blood in the cold air. Fred collapsed beside his sled. His clothes were torn to shreds. He was bleeding from more than a dozen wounds. 2 wolves lay dead nearby. The snow was churned and crimson. He was alone, but alive. It took hours for Fred to crawl back onto the snowmobile. By some miracle, the engine turned over. He rode it back toward his cabin, slipping in and out of consciousness. When he arrived, he used an old CB radio to call for help, his voice barely above a whisper. He passed out shortly after. The emergency team that reached him later that night said he was minutes away from dying. He had lost nearly half the blood in his body. His arm was broken. His leg was torn open to the bone. And yet, he had survived. Fred Desjarlais became a legend in northern Canada. The story spread fast, the trapper who took on a wolf pack and won. But Fred didn't talk much about it. When asked how he survived, he simply said, "I just wasn't ready to die." Experts who studied the case noted that wolf attacks on humans are extremely rare. Wolves are naturally cautious around people. But starvation, encroachment on territory, or illness can make them desperate. In Fred's case, it's believed the pack had been shadowing him for days, waiting for the right moment to strike. What they didn't count on was Fred's refusal to give up. His story is a brutal reminder of what nature is capable of, but also of what humans are capable of when we're pushed to the edge. Fred returned to trapping after he healed. Slower, perhaps. Scarred. But not broken. In fact, he said he felt closer to the wilderness than ever before. "You learn things out there," he told a friend. "Things no book can teach. You learn who you are." His cabin still stands near Fort Chipuyan. Locals say you can sometimes see him walking the tree line at dawn, checking tracks, his rifle over his shoulder. And if you ask him about the wolves, he'll give you a quiet smile and say, "That was a bad day, but I'm still here." And that's the story of Fred Desjarlais, a man who faced the wild and won. Thanks for watching Lore of the Multiverse. If you were gripped by this unbelievable tale of survival, hit that like button to help more people find it. Subscribe for more real stories of human resilience, wild encounters, and moments that defy belief. And let us know in the comments, what would you do if faced with a wolf pack, alone in the wilderness? Until next time, stay safe, and stay curious.